My guest on This Week in VC, Chris Dixon. I'm sure you all know him, but today we're going to get a chance to ask him tons of questions about Hunch, about being an angel investor, and about his views on the market. Tune in. Welcome to This Week in Venture Capital. My guest today, the estimable Chris Dixon. Welcome.
Thank you.
And actually, we had to come to you, so I had to come to New York.
Well,
do you ever make it to LA, or?
Occasionally, it's beautiful. I love it out there. I don't have, actually we have a few investments there, but I don't.
You don't have enough reason to come?
I'd love to. Last time I went there, I was like, I sort of, had this experience of like, why do I live in New York or whatever? It's so nice, but.
If you come in the winter or if you come in the summer, I think you'll feel that way. Yeah. Although I'm a big New York file. Yeah. Let's go back and talk a little bit about your history so that people understand you better, and then we'll go through some of the trends. You said to me you're a lifelong CS guy. Yeah. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I mean, it was funny. I was talking to Mike McHugh from Flipboard recently, and it's funny. I think you see this sort of same pattern, which is people, who got their first Atari 800, and then of course they tried to make video games, and then so sort of one of those. Actually, my first computer was actually before that. It was a TRS-80, which is like a, I don't know if you remember these.
Trash 80.
The Trash 80, Trash 80 Model 1, 4K. I remember someone saying, "Why would you ever need 8K?" And it's like, yeah, 4 is enough. So, so I learned BASIC.
When you're old enough to have seen 8-inch floppy drives go to 5 1/4 to go.
I had a cassette drive.
And then everyone else like, what's a floppy disk?
I know. I had a cassette drive in my first one.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Okay. No.
And you had to actually go and do like a homebrew hack to get sound. Like you had to actually open up the monitor. Anyways, so I did that kind of, I did that. I was into games. I was doing like C. I eventually got actually the best advice I got was a computer camp. It was like in, I don't know, I remember like way back, and this guy, this teacher there said, learn this new language, or wasn't new, but this emerging language called C.
Yeah.
It's like going to be the big thing.
Yeah.
And I was like, all right. So I did it, and it turned out to be, and actually he was right. And that when I grew up in Ohio, and I moved to New York to go to college, and that like paid my way through college was knowing C, and I worked like on the side, sort of doing that, sort of programming and things, and then
you had a double major in college. It was.
Well, I was actually I was a philosophy major, but I did a lot
some computing stuff on the side.
Yeah, it was basically I got into philosophy like. Do you remember books like Gödel, Escher, Bach, and like these books? Like they're sort of like these kind of like computer science, philosophy nerd books or whatever, and like Consciousness Explained, like Daniel Dennett and these things. So I was like reading all of these like computer science stuff that like got into artificial intelligence, and then there's a pretty short hop from that into like kind of cognitive science, philosophy of mind, things like that, and I sort of got interested in that, and then got interested in logic, and so I actually don't really talk about it on my resume because I don't really see the point, but I actually got a master's in degree in logic.
As you do.
So I'm a member of the American Symbolic Logic Society. Somehow it didn't.
I think I didn't pay my dues.
There wasn't like a.
Maybe I was kicked out.
Yeah, I don't know what the career goal there. I mean, my parents were academics. I thought I'd be an academic. I just assumed that was just sort of grew up in this environment where that was what you were expected to do. But then
do you think philosophy informs the way you think and work now?
I do. I think it.
Or was it just a waste?
Well, no. It was a great. I loved it. I mean, I loved it. I had a great experience. I sort of thought of philosophy. So the way I think the smartest thing I did career-wise, I think this is advice I would try to pass on to other people, is try to be good at more than one thing.
Yep.
And particularly like for example, in our industry, if you're good at computer science and at business, like that's a very powerful combination, right?
Yeah.
For me, philosophy was a way to kind of what I would describe as get kind of coffee house level knowledge of like sort of every subject, because you can do like philosophy of history, philosophy of physics, philosophy, and you can like get credits for just like reading physics books or something, right? And so it was my way of sort of getting like I don't really know,
knowledge,
just sort of a broad like kind of I would say coffee house, like I can kind of fake it at a dinner party or something, like I know something about economics, even though I really probably don't. But I think it actually is sort of helpful in kind of giving you a sort of broad framework. This sort of it's a cliche, but sort of you learn how to learn. It's sort of one of the things you learn when you have a kind of major like philosophy, because you're sort of like constantly jumping into new topics, and you kind of get good at like how do I figure out really quickly what matters in this subject and what doesn't.
Well, that's why I think I was asking about it, Chris. I have been giving this advice lately that, I mean, there's a lot of discussion about whether or not at a startup you need an MBA, for example? Like, is it a worthless degree? I've been telling people, if you want to get a master's for master's sake, I think a law degree might be more valuable than an MBA. Because I have a couple friends who are getting joint JD MBAs right now, and one of them in particular was going to drop one of them. And I said, if it were anything, I'd drop the MBA. And it's sort of weird to say that. I'm not an MBA hater. I have an MBA myself. But what philosophy teaches, what law school teaches, now I have a dual degree in economics and political science. Political science in many ways was more practical to me than economics because it taught me logical thinking, structure, and writing. Mm-hmm. And I think in business and in commerce, the ability to structure, think logically, organize, and convey your thoughts and convince other people is pretty important.
Yeah.
So.
No, I agree, and I think that's why I'm sure one of the reasons you're a really good writer is because you had writing intensive majors, right?
I had to crank out papers.
Yeah, I mean that's what I did too. I wrote papers all the time, and so I think like political science and economics, you're basically studying political science is sort of the study of power, and economics is the study of money, which are basically two of the main forces that run the world, and gives you, I think, a really good overview of how the world actually works. Right?
And my first computer course, because I thought I was going to be comp sci, because I grew up programming. Was in Pascal or something.
Yeah, they used to do intro, like that was the standard 101 was Pascal.
Terrible.
Yeah, Pascal was
really
awful.
First programming language that I programmed professionally was COBOL.
Yeah, COBOL.
But that dates me. Site Advisor was your first big.
That was my first venture-backed startup. I had started a company, a bootstrapped sort of cash flow positive kind of online marketing company before that, but which was moderately successful, I guess.
So your first big venture-backed startup, Site Advisor, and you've written about this in the past that it wasn't like people were banging down your doors to fund that company. People were a little bit skeptical. Talk a little bit about what Site Advisor does, how you were able to raise money, and what the results were.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll just talk a little bit about how I sort of identify the opportunity, which I think is a little bit of a maybe there's a general kind of pattern here that might be helpful to other people. So I had followed security for, security I thought was an interesting area, being kind of technical. I thought maybe I had sort of an advantage there over other entrepreneurs. I sort of felt like there was a pattern where every couple of years a new, what we'd say, threat class emerged. So so they would do viruses, spam, spyware. And for each new threat class, there was an interesting set of new companies that emerged to sort of to counter that threat class. Right. And so I was sort of waiting around as as I was sort of thinking about venture-backed, I wanted to do like a big venture-backed startup. Yeah. I was sort of waiting, and that was one of the things I was sort of watching was that. And so then, then sort of phishing started around 2002 or 3. Yeah. Then investigating a lot of what so-called spyware and adware. What I've sort of realized was that most of it was people bundling lots of desktop, these pop-up ads and things with software. Pop-unders. Yeah, and basically the common theme among all of these, both phishing and adware and these things, was that the nature of the threats had shifted from what we say in security as technical threats to social engineering threats. Okay. Meaning that nothing was malfunctioning technically. There was no breach in the browser. There was it was simply that the user didn't understand they were dealing with a disreputable counterparty. Yeah. So it'd be sort of like, and you basically had, and so the way the industry works is you have McAfee and Symantec. McAfee's now, I guess, it's owned by Intel, but they were sort of a duopoly. They dominate, and and they sort of, at the time at least, saw the world through the lens of technical security. So the way that I would describe it sort of is they saw themselves as building better alarm systems. Okay. But what was happening now was that the alarm systems were fine and they were doing their job, but the new threats were sort of like a person coming and claiming they're a Con Ed person when they really aren't. Right. So the alarm system didn't matter. Right. So the nature of the threats had changed. The incumbents saw, to the extent, for example, that all of their spyware groups were part of their antivirus groups. Right. Which, I think, if you understood the nature of the threats, didn't make any sense. Right. And is why companies like Webroot, if you remember them, they did very successfully navigated the spyware area and became like a $100 million revenue company and broke through because of that. Kind of, and so anyway, so that was sort of the key, I think, insight, and then the idea was, well, if the problem is that you don't know if it's a real Con Ed person, build a product that says whether this is a good or a bad website. It's a very simple idea in that sense. To actually build it, we had a sort of a choice. We sort of used to jokingly call it, we took an East Coast approach as opposed to a West Coast approach, which is, if we were West Coast, we would have put up a website and sort of tried to get users to go in and fill in the ratings. Yeah. Instead, I had two partners who were very sort of sophisticated MIT CS people, and we built an automated system that on day one, we already had sort of very good ratings for every website, basically. Okay. So we built this sort of crawler, kind of like a search engine, but instead of indexing keywords, we'd go and download software, for example, and run it in a virtual machine and test it and see what it did, and like all sorts of things like this. So we took, I could describe it as East Coast because it's kind of like a more risk averse, but like kind of like, you know, less sort of crowdsourced, I guess, and more sort of, you know, heavy tech or something. You know what I mean? Just sort of, I'm sort of stereotyping here.
But East Coast more referring to Boston, right? Because
this is sort of before the New York Renaissance or whatever, and all the New York sort of social stuff. At the time, East Coast was very like, you know, heavy iron, you know, like MIT, and West Coast was sort of much more like crowdsourced, user generated, right? And so. So we did that, and the biggest problem I had was when I explained it to people was, you know, it's very, I wrote a blog post about it, I think it's like, I describe it as being pigeonholed or something, which is, I think both the press and VCs and everyone, they like to say, oh, you're kind of like a fishing toolbar, but like with this twist, or you're like this with X, you know.
Everyone
like,
wants to put you in a box, right?
They want to put you in a box. And I said, no, it's not. And it was really, really hard to explain to people how it wasn't like fishing. And actually, when we launched the product, I went so far as to remove all anti-phishing features, because we eventually, the main interface was, it would overlay ratings as you searched, and phishing results don't show up in search engines because phishing sites are ephemeral and they don't get indexed, and so a bunch of reasons we didn't actually need phishing. But yet the press would continue to run these like, what's the best phishing toolbar, and then say, wow, SiteAdvisor sucks. And I would call them up and say, well, that's because we don't do anti-phishing, and they just didn't. And actually, we didn't finally get that message through until we had a competitor. And this company, this thing called Scandu, which was a competitor that sort of, I don't think they did a very good job of it, but at least they did the similar thing. And then suddenly Walt Mossberg covered it. You know, at the time, like Slashdot and PC Mag, they started considering this a new category. And that's when we really.
But here's a lesson for people, and I talk about this often, is competition is good. When you don't have competition, you don't have a market.
That's right.
And this is just a perfect example, which is when journalists write about something, they want to say, okay, well, is there a category here? Who else does this? They don't want to say this is novel, you're out on your own.
That's right.
When investors invest, they want to say, well, who else can I look at to see who else is doing it? When enterprise buyers buy software, they sit around and they say, okay, well, what category? And in fact, what often happens is they want to look at Gartner Group or IDC or what someone else is saying. So often, if you're not in a category and don't have competitors, it's very hard to get purchased.
That's right. The ideal situation, I think, is to have competitors, but to be better than them, right? Like, no, but I mean, you want to have like a bunch of B competitors, and you're the A player in the space. To have no competitors is a very, very hard thing to do. I mean, right? Because and it just, because like the press, for example, loves the horse race story. Right? The horse race, you know, Foursquare versus Gowalla, or you pick it, whatever the
or politics, right?
Yeah, exactly. They love this sort of who's winning, who's doing this, or like roundup, or what features are better, or you know, they love calling something a space and writing these trend pieces. And no one likes to say, wow, what's this thing that's kind of different and weird, and let's try to figure it out.
Well, it's interesting you say that, Chris, because I think another point for entrepreneurs is, you know, ultimately the press, when they write stuff, they need an angle. And you need to figure out what the journalist's angle is. A very common angle is, you know, A versus B. Or
a trend piece. The other one's a trend piece, right? Like, education startups are getting investment now, or whatever. You know, like there's like a new trend in social networking. But
it's very hard to just contact a journalist and say, right. They have to think about what the angle. So even sometimes when I start with a journalist, I talked to a lady from the New York Times recently, and she was asking me about color and funding and whatever. And I said to her before we got too far into the interview, do you have an angle for this story? Because if you have an angle, I can give my answers framed in your question. And if you don't, I can help you come up with an angle. But I'm pretty explicit up front, because I know that's the job of a journalist. So anyway, sorry for the aside.
No, I think that's exactly right. I think, and in fact, my sort of guiding principle for PR for SiteAdvisor was basically the idea that nobody cares about, I think it's a good thing to remember, nobody cares about your startup. I mean, there are, of course, exceptions if you're Twitter or something, you know, people do care about your startup, but most startups, no one cares about your startup. So the idea that you're going to put up a website and people will come, or that you're going to go and pitch a journalist and say, we should write about us because we're interesting, you know, because you're sitting inside the startup, you think it's the most interesting thing in the world. The rest of the world doesn't see it that way. And so, for example, with SiteAdvisor, what we did was all of our PR was not, the security was the most boring thing in the world to the press, right? And it's not like TechCrunch never covered us until we were acquired and somebody came up with a new product and they called it SiteAdvisor 2. It was literally the first time the word SiteAdvisor appeared there, to my great frustration. But just because security is boring, right? It's just to people. I mean, unless you're technical or whatever. And And so what we would do, for example, we got a lot of PR, we would go and say, what's the American Idol, which American Idol star has the screensavers with the most spyware?
Right.
And so we'd make all of our PR about other things. We actually got on the cover of the Wall Street Journal Site Advisor with a story about the safety of various, of Google versus MSN versus Bing search results, and the fact that actually
you're creating the angle for your story.
That's right. That's what you need to do if you
I'll
want to do PR.
give you one example, Chris, that's very similar to what you said. So Textplus is a company I invested in. It's ostensibly in the text messaging space, although ultimately it's a games company, a social games company. But people don't want to talk about how you can save $240 a year if you cancel your text plan and use Textplus. So what the company does is they poll teens and they ask them questions. They'll say things like, is it okay to break up with your girlfriend over text messages?
Absolutely.
Is it okay to ask a girl to the prom over text messaging? And they publish the results, and the press eats that stuff up.
Exactly. Yeah. No. So you need to. I think also, by the way, not hiring. I don't know what your view is on this is, but I think I'm very against hiring PR firms. I think that's like you're basically adding a layer of indirection in between you and the journalist. And I think the other thing is just treating journalists like people and treating them with respect. You know, I think they deal with a lot of people in the tech world who don't. You know, who are super wealthy and dismissive and treat them like they just should be their conduits of information. I think going and actually getting to understand what they're interested in and how you can shape your message to match their interests is a key to it.
So it's interesting. I hadn't expected a PR aside, but I think this would be good for people. So first of all, and I've written about this too.
Yeah, I think you have.
You have to respect the profession, and because you and I are both writers, I think there's probably much more of a healthy appreciation for what they do. And maybe because I'm a political junkie and I love the press, and I've always had a healthy appreciation for it. Throughout my time as a CEO in both companies, I realized that it's a relationship business. And so, like if you come to me and we've never met before and you've got your little tin cup and said, "Can I have money?" It's much harder than if I know you for a 2-year period of time and then you're going to be out raising and I'm almost leaning in. It's the same with journalists. So my view was build meaningful, real relationship with journalists that respects the profession. Be helpful to them. They struggle to get quotes. Yeah. If you can be the person who provides quotes to a journalist, believe me, that when you have something to say, they'll listen more.
That, and I also think, for example, like I remember when Google announced they were buying ITA. A whole bunch of journalists were like, they never heard of ITA. Like I just happened to know ITA pretty well, being in the business or whatever. And so like providing that kind of like quick background information, just like that kind of stuff. Like it's like very easy stuff where you can be sort of help them but I think ultimately it comes down to respect. Like my parents are English professors, so I feel like at home with journalists in a lot of ways. And I think just respecting them and understanding what they do and what what their challenges are and I don't know. I think
they're under time pressure. They need an angle. They've got to get a story out. They need quotes. Sometimes on the record, sometimes off the record, or helping them understand the story better. So I mean, it's an important thing in PR to build meaningful long-term relationships. Site Advisor, ultimately, how did you make money as that product?
We got acquired actually 12 months from funding. So,
you did? Okay.
So we had launched the product, and basically it's sort of an interesting background. I was very, one thing I think people probably don't do enough of is read analyst reports about their incumbents. When I say their incumbents, I mean the big companies, public companies in their space. I always try to make a point of that, so just to be smart about what's going on. And particularly, you have to remember the CEOs of those companies are reading those reports, and that's effectively their boss. Right? Yeah. So you're reading what their boss is telling them for the most part, right? And in the case of security at the time, what was going on was Microsoft had for the first time announced that they were going to release an antivirus product. Right. They had been sort of Switzerland with respect to security until then. That had depressed McAfee's and Symantec's stock price, or at least McAfee's, I can't remember exactly Symantec, but like 30% or something. Right. And so what happened was you had these sort of very, somewhat complacent companies who had really they had dominant distribution, because in security, consumer security, basically it's all about who has the OEM and because people, when they buy, you bundle it with the internet provider, and they just own these relationships and they have great brands. And they didn't really have an R&D pipeline. I sort of used to joke that there's two kinds of big companies: those that don't know how to build new products and know it, and those don't know how to build new products and don't know it. So, I'm kidding. I mean, there are big companies that build great stuff, but like what's great about like McAfee, Symantec, Cisco, and some other big companies is they have a sort of an explicit, in my experience, policy of just kind of not really doing R&D and just saying let's let and it's actually very smart, by the way. Anti-spam, the VCs probably funded 80 of them. Symantec paid I think $500 million for Brightmail, and McAfee bought somebody, and Google bought, but in aggregate, the VCs paid a lot more in R&D than the security companies would have. It was a very smart strategy, right? And that was their strategy. And so what happened in our case was that Microsoft sort of shadow looming over them said, okay, well we need to make our consumer products stand out. And we were literally the only venture-backed consumer security company, I think, of that 4-year period almost. I mean, it's hard to find anyone else. And so we had you talk about, acquisition dynamics are about supply and demand, like every other pricing kind of thing. Yeah. And so we had literally 5 suitors, and it was we had a demand of 5 and a supply of 1, and we had a very positive, and so it got to the point where the terms were so attractive. We wanted to build a longer term company, but the terms got so attractive and so quickly that we just sold.
Is there a lesson in there, Chris? Because
also, by the way, they'd said if you don't sell, we're going to build it and kill you. So I was like, okay, I guess we better.
Every big company says that.
I know.
I remember.
In this case, I think they could have, because
I remember reading about AOL in its early days, and Steve Case, the very first time he went to see Bill Gates, apparently, according to this book, that Bill Gates said to him, I can buy you or I can bury you, which is it?
Yeah.
And I had my share of those meetings with big companies. Yeah. They're like, oh, good job, young boy. Now it's time for the big boys. Do you want to sell to me, or should I just invest and kill you? So Site Advisor, is there a lesson in that, in the sense that you were in a category that was unsexy, unhot, not tons of competition, but that you believe there was inherent value, and so when it became apparent to other people it was easier to get acquired?
I think absolutely. I think for example, unless you are one of 30 people with a remarkable golden touch for social media today, you shouldn't be starting a consumer internet company, as an example. There's this vast oversupply of those companies. I mean, 5 years ago it was sort of it was underserved maybe, right? As an example, like, and that, I think there also, I think when I look at Founder Collective, which is the seed investment firm that I am part of, a lot of the things that get pressed are these sort of consumer facing. Actually, 70% of our dollars are invested in sort of what I would describe as sort of unsexy areas,
right?
And I think those are frankly more interesting from an investment point of view in a lot of cases, but.
I always say that the market is overweight in 2 categories. It's overweight in restaurant and bar apps, and it's overweight in music apps. Mm-hmm. And I think the reason that is because you get a lot of 22-year-olds thinking, or frankly 26-year-olds thinking, hey, what should we do? And the world for them is bars, restaurants, and music. And so they think, I got a new way to do X. Yeah. And I just think that there are definitely some.
Well, this is sort of the preaching of, like, if you scratch your own itch or whatever, right? And so if you're a 24-year-old, you don't have an itch in ad tech, or an itch in, I don't know what, like agricultural, robotics or something. Right? You have an itch in like going out or something, right? Like
but I would suggest developing an itch in a different category.
Well, I think that's something
I think going into the market where everybody else is hyper competitive. Also, they tend to be pretty tough industries to make money in.
Yeah, I think you need to do, and I'm sure I expect you're going to agree with this. I'm not saying anything non-obvious, but I think you need to find something that's both the intersection of something that's underserved and something that you can be passionate about for the next 6 years. So, like, you shouldn't go out and just like decide I'm going to go learn about something I can't stand. But there's probably I generally find that, like, my experience, like, security sounds boring from the out. When you actually start getting into it, it's really interesting, I think.
There's interesting problem sets to solve. I mean,
absolutely.
I do a presentation called All the Things I Fucked Up at My First Company. Yeah. And number one was I wasn't passionate about what I did. I mean, people wanted to give me money, so I took it and built it. Mm-hmm. Kind of a dumb way to go about it. And it was in the construction sector. And I became passionate about designing software, about figuring out how to set up a SaaS operating environment, about the sales process and learning everything I could about that, about analyst relations, about employment and hiring and venture capital. But But I still had to win customers, and to win customers, I had to go to conferences with people who would talk about reinforced concrete, or would talk about HVAC systems or glazing, and I didn't even know what glazing was, and I found it very boring.
Yeah.
It was hard to motivate myself to.
How long did that venture last?
6 years.
Yeah, so it's a long. So that's the thing. People, I think, a lot of people too. They just like maybe underestimate the length at which. I mean, 6 years is a long time, right? So you better find something you're ready to spend the next 6 years of your life spending 20 hours a day on.
Bingo.
Yeah.
The majority of companies, I say, if you're successful, you should be thinking about this in an 8-year time frame, because that's what it takes most businesses to succeed. We live in a very narrow slice where companies are getting acquired in a year, year and a half, 2 years. It's not the norm.
Yeah.
I want to do a quick ad break, if I could. Sure. We're an ad-supported show. One of our advertisers is called Ostensibly. And this is a problem I'm guessing will resonate with you, which is, as a company, as a brand, people feel entitled to complain publicly about you now. So if you didn't like your restaurant experience, if you didn't like your last flight on JetBlue or whatever, you just tell the world, right? So in a world where you can at companies, at JetBlue, I don't appreciate that this flight got canceled. In a world where I can send you an email, I can even, if I've liked you on Facebook, just go to your Facebook fan page and send customer complaints there. In a world where you have all these channels coming at you, you need a tool that can help you manage them. And that's what Ostensibly does. It's a trouble ticketing system designed for customer support for modern companies that want to take customer service and make it a sales attribute of the company. So if you look at Zappos, and it's built a policy of customer support being one of the key principles of why you should use Zappos, Ostensibly is a tool to try and help companies do that and turn it from a cost center to a marketing benefit. So thank you to Ostensibly for sponsoring the show. So who bought SiteAdvisor?
McAfee.
McAfee. And did you have a period of time that you had to work?
Yeah, I was there for about 15 months.
15 months.
Yeah.
And after that, what next?
So
when did you leave McAfee?
We were acquired in April 2006, so July 2007 or something like this.
Okay.
And we had a weird period where because they went through 3 CEOs while I was there, and I was the CEO, co-founder, and I don't think they really knew what to do with me.
Okay.
And so it was a kind of a weird thing for me. Like all of my rest of my team were technical, and they were pretty busy. But it was weird because I sort of had to stay there, but they kind of didn't want me to do anything, even though I sort of tried to. And I think by the end, like literally, they didn't know who I was, the new CEO. So that's when I got active as an angel investor, and because that was something I could do while I was there without taking a full-time job, and I found that because I'd worked a little bit in VC and because I'd raised money, that I had, I didn't get to the point where I built a sales team. I haven't done a lot of things that probably you've done and other people, entrepreneurs, have done. I found that sort of what I was good at was sort of helping people kind of get from the very early stage, maybe the idea stage, to maybe the financing stage, or maybe from the seed financing to the venture stage, and sort of got involved in that kind of stuff. Then immediately after, literally 2 days after we were sort of done with SiteAdvisor, we rented an office, no idea what we wanted to do. I say me and a couple of the other SiteAdvisor guys, and we thought something in artificial intelligence would be cool. We started just working, like hacking on stuff. Did that for 6 months, and eventually sort of had the beginnings of what became Hunch.
So let's talk about Hunch in a minute. Let's quickly cover angel investing. How do you choose what to invest in? What do you look for? Who should approach you? Is it sometimes Chris Dixon, sometimes Founder Collective? Is it always Founder Collective? Like, what is the entity Chris Dixon Angel Investor?
So originally it was Chris Dixon because there wasn't a Founder Collective, and now I try to do everything through Founder Collective. Occasionally there'll be stuff that just falls so far outside of the purview, either because it's such a small allocation or because it's just like my uncle's dry cleaning business, whatever, like that kind of thing, So, so basically Founder Collective, Okay. And I think sometimes those two get conflated, like in TechCrunch or something. It's generally always Founder Collective when you see my name.
Okay. And so what generally, Founder Collective, I guess, is looking to be First Institutional Capital.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're known for wanting to invest in one round but not following in future rounds.
Yeah, I mean, we have this internal debate all the time about it because we I've blogged about this and kind of gotten known for this view of sort of the danger of signaling, of having investors. And for better or worse, we practice this. I don't know, maybe for like a lot of VCs say for worse because they say their best returns are on like doubling down on their good ones. We debate it internally, but we have this policy basically of not. We do have a policy of not following on. So that there's absolutely no signaling, and also because we believe that we want to sort of really specialize in this one stage of investing.
Okay.
And I do it. I co-founded it with Dave Frankel and Eric Paley, who I believe you know. And we were all buddies. They started companies and sold them, and we were co-investing together during our individual investing phase,
right.
and then. And we saw sort of Founder Collective as a startup in the sense that we thought there was a changing landscape. It's sort of, I think, two themes. One is just the sort of, I think now it's been talked about to death, but 4 years ago it was somewhat of a novel idea, which is that sort of there was going to be kind of a stratification of sort of VC finance, and that firms had gotten bigger and it cost less and less to start a company, and these trends that we've talked about on our blogs and things, and that there was an opportunity there to just sort of be focused on that stage. And then number two was to be kind of primarily focused on the East Coast and New York and things like that. And so those were kind of the two themes, I guess. And
right. So early stage Northeast is the
we do California, but
more in the Northeast.
I mean, we're definitely more weighted to the Northeast than most funds. Let's put it that way. But
what's the state of the New York market right
now? It's definitely. I mean, it's there are lots of companies being started. It seems like some of them are pretty interesting. It seems like I see tons of VCs coming in from Boston, California. So there's certainly the perception of it being an interesting place. I think I hope it's a sort of a real secular trend and not sort of just simply a result of the financial downturn or just the sort of the general frothiness in the consumer internet space or something. Right. But I think that to me that's a question I wrestle with a lot, is like, is this something that's a longer term trend, which I hope it is, just being someone who plans to live in New York for a long time and likes tech. I've sort of been used to, until 2 years ago, if you were in New York and told someone you were an entrepreneur, tech entrepreneur, they thought that meant you were like unemployed and living off your trust fund or something, right? So it's sort of nice to like actually like have a place here. I hope it's a longer term trend. I think that that what's happening, right, is that you can take a company like Kickstarter is an interesting company, I think, or Foursquare maybe to some extent, but like Foursquare is definitely an interesting company. But I'm saying in terms of like the types of people that can start these companies are people that are really just sort of user experience people. I said so Foursquare is very exciting. What I meant is that they're also technical, whereas Kickstarter they're really just more kind of user experience. So the strengths of New York, which is sort of design, creativity, consumer. It's definitely a consumer town, in general. If you look at all the industries here, it seems as though the trends in the internet sort of do favor New York in that sense, and that's playing out. And that I think that's what I hope is sort of the longer term secular trend. Right. But I don't know. So.
We will see.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it takes an economic cycle to kind of figure out whether you have a secular.
I mean, I agree. There will be a downturn, and the question in 2001 on the East Coast, everyone left the tech scene, or not everyone, but the people that.
It was B2B and B2C, right? Back to banking and back to consulting.
Yeah, and I think in particular there was a deep distrust of equity that came out of that, and I experienced this like trying to recruit people on the East Coast in let's say 2000.
They don't value options.
They don't value. They just thought it was a scam actually. Right. Kind of like 2004, trying to convince an engineer on the East Coast, that had been around and like had all seen other options worth nothing, and because they'd also not just had things not gone well, but I think there was a lot of kind of games being played. So for example, like a lot of people were like, the company got sold for $20 million. I didn't get anything, so they didn't understand 2x preferences and all these other shenanigans that went on in the dot-com bubble. Yeah. And so I think it was beyond just sort of like they're not worth anything. It was almost like a scam,
I guess, but that theme is returning again in light of Skype. I'm not saying. I
worry about it. I mean,
I'm not saying it's happening, but it's a discussion that we're all having again, aren't we?
I worry about it. I think that we need to see not only good exits, but good exits that reward employees in a way that, on the East Coast, in a way that makes people believe in equity the way they do in California.
Right.
Like in California, everyone said, that's the first thing they ask about, right? I mean, like, And that we don't have that. We're getting that mindset a little bit here, but I think that's what I worry about, is that then there'll be a downturn, and then everyone will kind of go and be disgusted again with this whole thing and say, oh, this whole, you know, and then there will. So I try to think about, as part of the New York tech community, how can we prevent that from happening?
Right. I think the flip side is also dangerous, where you get a culture that's too focused on options. And I sometimes see that in Silicon Valley. It's like, okay, I've been here 18 months, so I've banked my 20% of my option pool, and I just want to go somewhere else, because if I can get 20% options in 4 companies in 6 years, then I've got a diversified option pool or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in generally, like in like Silicon Valley, both the strength and weakness, right, is the excess, right? It's also what's wonderful about it is everyone believes in equity, and they're willing to do these crazy things, and they're willing to, like, you think about like YouTube, and there's like 50 videos, and it's like, you know, then it has 50 photo sharing things, and there's all these things, and it's excess, but there will be something interesting that comes out of it, right?
Yes.
Like that's what's so great about California, is like, and it's both, you know, it's both the strength and weakness, right?
Yeah, and I've talked about this before. It's the creative destruction, and through the creative destruction, we get a greater social good. I
think we do.
Hunch. Mm-hmm. What the hell is it?
So Hunch is it's a recommendation system, and it's we have both a sort of a consumer-facing application, and then we have sort of our main focus is our API, which is something that anyone can use or at least tinker with. And we have at some level we have commercial relationships of usage, but where you can, for example, it's basically you can go and you can say this user has these preferences, and or this person is this Twitter user or this Facebook. We have all sorts of every you know, kind of user ID system mapped. We have also we have sort of 500 million what we call items, which can be.
Give me an example of the kind of person who would want to consume your API, and for what purpose? Well,
like Gifts.com was using it as an app that was a gift.
To make better recommendations for you. I want to buy something for Chris Dixon.
That's right.
What might he like?
That's right. And so for anything commerce related, and particularly what we're good at is what's called in the recommendation space the cold start problem, which is that, you know, there's sort of this tension, which is that recommendation systems get better when you have more data about the person. Right. But when the person first comes is when you want to make the best first impression. And so we're very good at taking a very sparse, like our technology is about taking sort of a very sparse amount of information and inferring a lot more about the person, essentially.
Do you do anything with things like cookies so that you can know the 20 sites I visited before?
No, we do no cooking. Because we think of it as, I mean, we do first-party cooking, like just to stay session state, but we don't do any off-site cooking.
Right.
We are very strict about, we don't, like, you can't query our database to ask about anything about that particular Facebook user. You can ask about an item, like an item being like a product or a venue, and if the person OAuth'd in, you can ask about the Facebook user. Okay. Technically, we could, and legally, we could actually let you query for the Facebook user because it's all predicted information.
Right.
It's not like we're taking that information from somewhere. We're just very, very strict about the privacy, maybe to a fault. Sorry, your question was, I lost my train of thought.
Whether you were cooking people.
No, we're not cooking people, no.
History.
No, so I sort of view it as this. Like,
you talked about the cold start problem. Like, if I go to Gifts.com, let's take an example, and you know a bit about my surfing history, you probably can make some. We could.
We just philosophically believe. So I believe that websites will become more and more personalized. There'll be more and more recommendations. All these things, these trends will happen, and it'll happen in one of two ways. It'll either happen through kind of behind-the-scenes cooking, and with that sort of, I would describe an opt-out method, or it'll be an opt-in method. Okay. And we want to be the opt-in. We want the opt-in method to win, and we want to be the person who drives it. So we want people to, be able to store kind of what we call their taste profile at Hunch, and be able to OAuth it into another website in the same way that they connect with Twitter or Facebook or something. So we want to have personalization be controlled by the users and not done through sort of a shadowy cookie backend, and that's why we actually don't do that.
Are you going to continue to invest in a consumer-facing website?
Well, the consumer-facing gives us it gives us, like, for example, if you just go to Hunch right now and you look for a current movie, for example, we have all sorts of taste information about that movie due to the consumer-facing website.
Right.
So we actually have, what we have is a very active kind of contributor community there, which gives us a lot of good data, which improves our API and keeps it fresh. So that was one of our problems, and we actually just changed the website so it's more of like a feed kind of format, and that's deliberately to kind of make it so that there's fresher information, so that like a new movie that comes out, we have taste information on it and all sorts of things, which makes our API better as a result.
Is your inference always going to be on me and my stated preferences or stuff you know about me, or will you infer anything based on my social graph?
We do, so for example, we would be able to, I could run a query on you, like given your Twitter name and Facebook ID or whatever, and we would have predictions about you, and that would be based on, what we basically think of it as this way, is we have sort of a million-ish known Facebook data points, meaning people that have Facebook connected and then answered a bunch of questions about themselves. So they've said, so someone has said, they've Facebook connected to Hunch, and they've said, I like Barack Obama.
Right.
And then we see that, and we start to notice that there's a correlation between people who like Barack Obama and sushi.
Gotcha.
And then we see that you like sushi, and then we predict you like Barack Obama. I mean, I'm simplifying it, but it's sort of done like this if you imagine this then with 80 variables going in or something. It turns out actually on Facebook, just as an aside, that
so you do a lot of correlation analysis.
That's what the whole thing is. It's a giant statistical engine, basically. And it turns out actually your friends are not very predictive of you, but your likes are very predictive.
So here's the thing, Chris, and I've written about this, and I mentioned you guys in my post about it, but I didn't know enough about how you were solving this problem. A lot of what we do as consumers today, we're in search of things. Let's take travel. We want to find a good hotel to stay at. We want to find a good restaurant to go to. We want to find the right movie. And let's take travel. You go to TripAdvisor. TripAdvisor is not very predictive of what I'm going to like. So the example I like to give is if I go to...
we have I think we know what you're getting at. Like we have a demo that reorders Yelp reviews according to who's similar to you, as an example.
Awesome.
Like I think that's what you're getting at.
I've been asking for this product.
I can send you the demo. I mean, we haven't...
3 years to invest.
We have that product. We just haven't released that because we think Yelp will get pissed, but I don't know.
I've told everybody, build it as a technology and provide it to third parties for themselves because all the consumer-facing sites are already there.
Yeah.
And to compete with them is going to be difficult. But none of them are going to be able to figure out how to build.
That's exactly what we're trying to do.
Because like the example that I give, Chris, is if I go to Laguna, it's in Southern California, and you can stay at the St. Regis there. I always stay on points because I'm a Starwood guy, and it's pretty expensive. But if you read the TripAdvisor reviews, it would say, don't go there because they have a kiddie pool and people will wake you up at 7 in the morning. And I'm thinking, fuck me, that's a perfect place for me, you know?
No, and like Yelp, you go and you see it's got lower, and then you see, because they're maybe more price sensitive than you, or they like spicier food, whatever.
And your social network is not a good predictor of that. And the example I give here, Chris, is if I go to Santa Barbara, I went for my dad's 70th birthday 4 years ago or something, and I organized it for the whole family. So they're part of my social network, but we have different socioeconomic backgrounds, we have different family structures, so the kind of things that they might spend money on or not, or the type of place they want, it's very different than me. So what I want to know, I might like to take a slice of my social network. Sometimes I want to know that. I might like to take a slice, I probably want a slice of people who are like me. I want to know 43-year-olds who are socially liberal, who are urbanites, who are interested in technology, who have family, the things that are more like, who like independent film, that's more likely to predict, I think, what I'm going to like.
No, and so we have that ability to do that. And the inhibitor has been, actually, I think we're both investors in Factual.
Yes.
The inhibitor, they're solving a very, very important problem that has been our primary inhibitor, which is when we go to the Yelps of the world, the biggest problem we have is aliasing, as we say, like their venue database to our venue database, or products are even worse, because products, there's like, not only is there just a million different standards, but there's deliberate obfuscation that goes on, you know, and so that's the biggest challenge we have. There's just one of them, and I think so in theory, like TripAdvisor tomorrow could use our API. In practice, the data needs to be aliased, and that has been a challenge for us that we've been working on overcoming and building lots of tools. And I think, so that
is sort of normalization.
Yeah, exactly. So normalization, I think that basically what we need, and I think this will happen, but I think what the web needs it'll be huge, is normalization of people, places, and products. Probably are probably the three big categories. And it's completely unnormalized. And actually, if you go, and I personally still program, and I go and I play with the Foursquare API, and I play with this, you can't do. Have you ever seen an actually useful mashup of two APIs? Yeah, I mean, so people talk about mashups, they're never actually useful, and the reason is that nothing's normalized. You can't really cross-reference the data.
The only ones that I see that work.
They're always fun. I mean, they're cool, but like.
But they were the original ones, which is if you can map a location to a map itself. So housing maps was the original mashup, I think, that everyone used to talk about. Because you could map an address in Craigslist to a map in Google. But
there you had a normalized system, which is addresses.
Exactly.
So this problem of normalizing those three categories.
Facebook, and I'm a fan of Facebook, so I'm not Facebook. I'm a fan of Foursquare.
Yeah.
So I don't want to sound disparaging, and in fact, we're in their building, so I should be careful. They might hear me.
Well,
but here's the thing: their database is not normalized. They need to invest.
Well, in fairness, they have been a big sponsor of this open venue project, and they're working with Factual and other people. Okay. So they've been proponents of that.
Because so yesterday when I arrived at JFK and I type in JFK, and you get like all this random crap, and so I type JFK Airport, and you get random crap for each venue you might check into. It might have 3 different entries because 3 different people entered it.
I think they realize that's an issue, and that's why they are supporters of this sort of normalization effort. And I think that will happen.
That's good to hear. I didn't realize.
Yeah, no, they are. They actually have a whole they're really actually putting resources behind it and things. So, I mean, I'm disclosure an investor, but I think that they're on the good side of that problem.
And you led the $600 million.
Yeah, I just put in $50 million personally. I didn't know.
So a very quick aside on Fenwick and West. Fenwick and West is a sponsor of the program. I didn't already talk about Fenwick and West, did I?
Not on camera.
No, okay. So Fenwick and West is a law firm. I'm sure you've heard them.
Yeah.
You've been involved.
There's basically, I mean, I'll just plug them with you. There's 4 law firms that a startup should use, and by the way, I've tried going outside of that to save money, and it's not worth it.
Right.
And it's Gunderson, Fenwick, Wilson. I'm just going to undermine your advertising.
You can say
Wilson, Sonsini, and Cooley.
Okay.
I don't know.
Well, you made the list, Fenwick and West. You made Chris Dixon's top 4 list. And definitely Fenwick and West is on my list. I used them when I was a CEO. I worked with Sam Angus, who's now the counsel at Airbnb.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just about how good they are. It's also the fact that they're sort of a standard API. So, for example, on my last Hunch financing, investor didn't use counsel, which saved us 30 grand because I very deliberately said these are the boilerplate Gunderson documents, and there's no reason you need to have a lawyer read them.
Yeah.
And I saved 30 grand. So it's like also besides the fact that they understand startups, all these firms, it's standardized.
So very recently, about a year ago, I started not hiring lawyers for my A round and B round deals. Unless there's any complexity, I tell the founder, I'll share your lawyer with you, but recognize I'm doing this. So as long as there's no complicated negotiation and you don't try monkey business, and if it's standardized documents, we can.
Especially with smaller financing, because it's just tragic. It's tragic to see 70 grand or whatever the company's money go to these things in these smaller
Where does Hunch go next?
So I believe that there will be a class of I believe that in a few years we will have a data services layer to the internet. And that means not just like Hadoop server, like cloud, like AWS, like a cloud infrastructure, but actual services that provide data. Right. So, like for example,
I've bet heavily on that.
Yeah, and so I want Hunch to be one of those primary services, and particularly around predicting people's preferences, which you can call recommendations, you can call personalization. But I believe that we've built is the most sophisticated system for predicting human preferences that's ever been built, and I think we believe that and can prove that. And now I think the question is, I think that will be extremely valuable in this data services layer, and we want to be the leader in that space.